Good afternoon, my friends. I'm Oskar Eustis, Artistic Director of the Public Theater, and I want to welcome you to our panel.
Yay, Oskar.
Very kind. The two women next to me are the definition of needs no introduction. I'll give a brief introduction otherwise. Marin Alsop is the chief conductor of the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra. She is also the incoming Harman Eisner Artist in Residence for the Aspen Institute. Her list of achievements and her extraordinary biography are far too long for me to say here, but I do want to mention that when she became chief conductor of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, she became the first woman to lead a major American orchestra. And Renée Fleming is a soprano. And she is...
In her spare time.
Yes, exactly. She is, needless to say, one of the most beloved artists in the world, I think we can say. An extraordinary artist who's also spent a lot of time working on arts and relationship to health. And she is the co-artistic director of the Aspen Opera Theater here in Aspen. So welcome, both of you. You know, and we're going to talk about the arts as a way of connecting and reconnecting in this present moment with each other. And I think I'd like to start right in our present moment. We're all going back to performing. We're coming back to live audiences. And what are you discovering as you do that? What is notable, new, different, the same?
Well, I went back mid-August a year ago, and I've had a pretty normal schedule, touring Europe, touring the U.S. However, what I've seen is that audiences coming back it's differed really from place to place. Yeah. In some places, it's 100%. People are thrilled to be back in the house, hearing music live. And other places, it's very slow. And there's no guarantee that we will get up to the numbers we were at before. People have pivoted, they have other interests, and they're still afraid a little bit, I would say. Right. I always talk to the audience, too, and I try to kind of make a joyful environment. Plus, I'm a closet comedian. It's my greatest joy in life is making people laugh, and so I try to fold that into very serious music.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you notice any characteristics of places where audiences are coming back more versus audiences coming back less? Is there anything that unites those places at all?
I mean, I think, Marin can say this too, I think Europe has come right back.
Yeah. I think because, you know, it begs a much broader question about the role of culture in our lives and in our various different societies. I think, you know, in Vienna, where I'm based much of the time now, you know, people were coming to concerts right until they locked the door on them, really. And the return to concerts, it might not be 100%, but it feels like it's so much part of their lives and the fabric of their existence that they crave this kind of nourishment. Whereas in the United States, I think, you know, we really need to look at the fact that maybe people weren't breaking down the doors to get in before COVID. So, you know, are they going to be coming back? But I had hoped that, not to go on too much on my soapbox, but I had hoped that during this time of COVID would be a time of real reflection on the part of arts organizations. And we would say, are we serving our communities in the way we need to be serving them? Is there enough access for people? You know, a huge difference between Europe and the US is the price of a ticket, for example, so that's a big barrier here. And I was hoping,
Could you put some metrics on it, just for those who
gosh, I would say, you know, to go to the Musikverein, probably, you know, about 20 euros. Wow. And, you know, as opposed to $150 here or something like that. So, I mean, that's just a rough estimate, but I do think that I was hoping to talk everybody into making all arts events free for a while, you know? I mean, yeah, it's a good idea, but
I like it.
But we would really need some government support like they have in Europe. And, you know, I'd love to see some leadership. I'd love to see some leadership, period. Anyway, but you know, so, I mean, there's so many things to say about it. But the thing I really want to say is that the audiences that are coming are fantastic. they're so excited and they're so engaged. And you know, suddenly that door opened because of Me Too movement, because of Black Lives Matter. The door finally opened to expanding our repertoire from this tiny little swath from Haydn to Stravinsky. That's all you're allowed to play. Now we're able to play. We can put jazz in. We can put music by women composers. Oh my gosh, you know, and everyone, and have women conductors. Holy mackerel! And you know, everyone's so astounded. Where did all these talented women come from? And I'm just sitting watching them thinking, you gotta give me a break. Are you serious, people? Because we could have done this 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but here we are. At least we're doing it, and we need to keep doing it.
So that is something that you are not hoping for in the past tense. That's something you're actually seeing happen.
Oh, definitely. There's been a huge change, and also the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Listen, arts, we're all pretty well-intentioned by and large, but people needed to open the eyes and say, oh my gosh, we're not doing this right. And this needs to happen from top to bottom. Women, people of color, inhabiting the arts world, and they're gifted enough. There's certainly so much talent, and it's happened really fast with singers, and they were already there before as well. But now, and frankly, there are a lot of programs your Orchids is extraordinary for children coming up who can gain the skill set that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think the missing part, I started a program in Baltimore called Orchids, Orchestra Kids, and from 30 kids in 2008, they have over 2,000 kids now playing musical instruments. It's amazing. Yeah, it's great. And some of those original kids have gone on to college studying music education, because they want to bring the program back to their neighborhoods. But we still need that next step, you know, because you don't go from a sudden generation playing a musical instrument into a symphony orchestra. You know, there's a transition, and we need that help. And I've been trying to get orchestras to think about creating like apprenticeships or fellowships within the orchestra so that young kids can have the experience. And you know, I think there's still a lot of work we need to do. And we have to build those roads, those bridges for, you know, it's not going to automatically happen.
Well, the Kennedy Center also did a study, because what they were finding is that they couldn't get interns, they couldn't get people to work in administration, and they discovered that there are points along the way where there isn't enough support.
Right.
And frankly, the young interns who do work in arts organizations are generally supported by their parents because they're not paid anything. So all of that needs to be readdressed and looked at. So we have a fabulous body of talent that represents really the population.
We had to, at the public several years ago, abolish unpaid internships and pay every intern at least a minimum wage, which is $15 an hour in New York, precisely for that reason. It was impossible to begin to reach our diversity goals if the entrance gate was actually silently guarded by trust funds. You know, it's just, and it's made a huge difference for us.
That's great.
Right.
Can you talk a little more detail about Orchids? It's such a fantastic program.
About the Orchids program?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, I've always been distressed. I mean, being sort of one of the few women that was somehow allowed through or snuck through. I was always very conscious of the lack of diversity in orchestras. And then when I was appointed in Baltimore, and I went to that city, which is, you know, predominantly African American, I think 60 some odd percent. And in the orchestra, we have one black musician who's been there for 40 years. But there's no real effort to change the demographic on stage or in the audience. And so I really started thinking hard about it. How can we try to impact that? And I realized that, you know, kids just, when you don't have the money, you're not giving your kids violin lessons. You know, I mean, that is way at the bottom of the list. So I said, well, why don't we just see what happens if we go into a school, try to, and, you know, everybody thought it was a terrible idea. And I did too some days, but we went to a school, and 30 kids signed up. And oh my God, they were so cute. 30 first graders in West Baltimore. And, you know, we basically were winging it. You know, we got some people to donate instruments, and then we got a little bit of this. And the kids took to it. I thought, oh, maybe they're not going to like classical music. It was like, really, they just drank it in. And they were so talented. All of these kids, I thought, they could all be, they're all geniuses. All kids are born geniuses. We just suck it out of them, right? and so anyway, so really, we took our cue from the kids. Whatever they needed, we added. We realized they weren't eating well. So we got an organization to donate a meal every day. And then we realized that their families didn't have enough food, so whatever was left over, we'd leave in a box on the door at the school. Then we realized their reading was behind. So then we got companies to come in and start reading with them. So music was just a vehicle. It's a program to try to respond to what the kids need. And then the kids said, we don't want to just play classical music. We want to play music of our time, popular music that we like. So they have a jazz band. They also improvise. They're much more well-rounded musicians than I was at their age because they're kids of the world. They play bucket band. They all sing in the choir. And I think they're just, and we try to teach them a lot about stage presence and really presence in the world. So when you go to their school, they all look you in the eye and say, hello, my name is whatever, and they introduce them. And they're so mature. I mean, I wish my son had been able to do that at his age, So or even now at 18. But no, he's a good kid. But they're, so it becomes about, the skills to be an artist, and I'm sure Renée would agree with me, are skills, and you too, Oskar, that really create a great society. You have to learn how to motivate yourself every day, to practice, to study, to work. You have to be able to take criticism and not fold. You have to be able to work with others and listen. You have to know, if you're playing in a jazz band, you have to know when to step out, when to step back. All these skills are skills that are transferable to any discipline. So my belief, okay, I'm almost done. No. My belief is that if we invested in the arts as a primary focus for kids, our society would benefit on every level.
No question.
Because the attributes you're describing are exactly what we need from democratic citizens. We need people who know when to take space, when to not take space, when to listen, how to listen, create it. All of those different skills are what we need for the society.
Well, every time I go to a concert, an orchestral concert, and I look at 60 to 100 musicians on stage listening carefully to each other. It's an example of what cooperation and collaboration looks like. And I'm reminded of that now every time. So do come to the Aspen Music Festival and come to all of our concerts. But it's really, besides hearing beautiful music, you see this tradition of listening.
And Renée, you're also doing work in the art and health. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little about that.
That's become a huge passion of mine. Basically, I just became fascinated with the mind-body connection and then discovered that a lot of scientists were studying music. So music has been the largest swath of research available. The NIH is now funding research, and I personally believe that the art should be embedded fully in our healthcare system. We have a lot to contribute, and there's a lot of science that now supports the interventions that have been created. But also, the first thing I want to do is called Art Care, which would be a simple app that is accompanying AI healthcare, which is now growing in leaps and bounds, and it's available to so many people, especially in big box stores. And so if those folks also found on their app that they could have all kinds of arts programming for them, and certainly in the health sector, a stroke choir or music lessons or dance for Parkinson's disease, which I took a class and worked up a sweat and never got out of my chair. And there are just, there's so many wonderful programs. I mean, the Kennedy Center is also the center of all things disability and arts. So people around the country, go onto the Kennedy Center site to find out how they can make their arts organization welcoming to everybody. Caregivers, that's a huge subject right now. But the biggest one I think we're addressing, we've had two convenings now on this, is mental health in the arts. Huge, because it's about social cohesion, which we have needed and used throughout our history as human beings. This goes back at least 40,000 years and probably way before that. And we're losing that now, and that's why the fabric of our society is fraying so quickly.
I've got two great artists here on my left, both of whom are passionate about their arts in relationship to social activism, in terms of what it does to, in a way, beyond the concert hall. And I wonder if you can talk about the connection you see between your identities as artists and your identities as world changers.
Well, I sometimes think there isn't a great connection. I'm just doing a lot more work outside of my performances, which I love. I will say there is one, I would say, important thing that I really did manage to accomplish during the pandemic, which we all pivoted to some degree. Right. You know, to be stopped from performing after decades of every 3 days on a plane, right? Yeah. Was a bit of a shock. So first I created a webinar in which I, interviewed people who were doing this arts and health work. And then I was so healed by being outside in nature. I became the probably champion tree hugger in my area in Virginia where I live. Yes, definitely. So I created an album actually, because I've thought about this for years, about all the poetry of the song literature that I perform from the 19th century, which is kind of the heyday from Schubert on, is steeped in nature. Every human condition, every thought, every emotion has a natural connection. You know, the rose died, the rose is blooming, I want to meet you out in the woods, can't you come out and find me? So they're just almost every song. It's hard to find them that don't, compared with our kind of connection to nature now. So we commissioned 4 new works, sort of kind of giving us a snapshot of what's going on at this moment. So it's called Voice of Nature, the Anthropocene, which we know is the age of human beings, which has not been so great for nature.
That's right. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. We had a full year and a half of performances being off the table, a year and 4 months. What did you think about during that time?
Oskar, we want to hear from you too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I really want to hear what you have to say about it.
You'll hear from me in a minute, but let me ask you first. So what during that time, I mean, because we were all, in a way, we were thrown into a time of reflection. We were sort of forced to stop so many things and think of.
Yeah, well, we got in an RV. We rented an RV, as our son said. That was unexpected. And off we went across the United States. This was before everyone was afraid to go out. It was wonderful. We had the best time, because our lives are so regimented as artists. First of all, the schedule is insane, but then also you have to study, you have to practice, and it was all suddenly gone. Yeah. I mean, you still feel the confines of it and still work to a certain degree because that's how you're built now. But I think it was really, at least from my perspective, really freeing to not have the constraints of the schedule. My schedule since COVID ended has been completely insane. It got completely out of control. I wasn't looking, and then, but I do think that during COVID, Kristen, my partner who runs the fellowship that I started in 2002 for women conductors, and our fellow is here, so you may run into her and hear from her. Anna Marotz is here from Poland. This is our Taki fellow. And, we have 30 recipients of this fellowship, and I was, it was one thing for me to have all my performances canceled, but if you're just starting out and you finally are getting your break and you have a debut week and all of your debuts are canceled, and you don't know if they're going to reschedule, you don't know what's going to happen. So we had all of these women who finally got their foot in the door, and then this COVID slammed the door shut. So Kristen and I got together and we started meeting on the Zoom with all the women, and we met twice a week for a long time. And we started creating, really discussions about important topics for us, about repertoire, about everything, about conducting technique. And I think what we were able to do was to really build the infrastructure for a great community. And they now have each other, and everyone's working together, and the fellowship's really expanded. And on a personal level, as a conducting teacher, I do a lot of teaching. I was very, well, teaching conducting is strange anyway, because if you don't have musicians, you can't actually practice. You know, if you don't have 20 people come over, you can't even practice your instrument. So, you know, I was teaching conducting while they're conducting and nobody's playing anything. You know, it's like the weirdest thing. So I got pretty, I mean, it was good in some ways. Of course, you find the positive. But I got interested in the AR stuff, and so I've been working on a project to create an experience, you know, using one of the headsets for 3D that can simulate conducting an orchestra. And so that's been very cool. Also, you know, during COVID, I don't know if you had this experience, but I could access a lot more people because they were hanging out. And so when I found an email for this incredible professor at MIT who plays the clarinet, and he was like, oh, sure, I'll be involved. So I have a team of people that inadvertently got connected to me. And so we're working on this project now, really in depth, to create this experience. And also maybe it may have health benefits too. For example, I've been speaking to some doctors at Hopkins, and they're looking for some things for their stroke victims to do that aren't terribly strenuous, but would enable them to do arm movements.
That's working already.
So
I've heard. Yeah, I've heard it's going great.
Yeah.
Talk about your film, though, the World Economic film. I thought that was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh yeah, I did a couple things. Oh yeah, also for, you know, when everything was canceled, we also tried to think about creating art that would be timeless, that could exist in different moments of time. And so for the World Economic Forum, we created a film called See Me, which brought together musicians from around the world. Afghanistan, from the program there, from the boys' choir in Drakensberg in South Africa, Sao Paulo, my choir there, orchestra in Vienna. Wow. And it was very cool. And
Yo-Yo Ma doesn't hurt either. Yo-Yo Ma playing cello on the beach.
He was there too.
It's a good start.
Yeah, he answered my call too.
But that's how, you know, I saw these kids in Afghanistan, and when the U.S. started to leave Afghanistan, I reached out to Marin and I said, what's happening with those players? Boys and girls playing next to each other at a very high level, and so that's another whole panel.
I think we're doing that panel tomorrow, actually, aren't we, Jessica? Friday. That panel is actually on Friday, but. And then there's a documentary.
We also had a digital performance together. We had a digital. Yes, I sang your gala.
That's
and
right.
The only time this really worked is if I could get to the orchestra and we could film it together under very, you know, sort of careful conditions. But trying to do digital recordings together online
remotely, that's
the technology's just not there yet.
That's
and we really systematically. I have someone in my office who's extremely good with technology, and we tried everything. FarPlay is the closest one. It's new, but by the next pandemic, we should have it sorted out.
We had some genuinely disastrous attempts to workshop musicals over Zoom, which were just so terrible.
The latency is too great. It's just terrible.
Renée, I'm wondering, so we had this step back, and now we're leaning back forward. And in terms of the art form itself, what do you think we need to be thinking about to make better conditions for the artists and the audiences that are coming after us? You know,
well, there are a couple of things. First of all, the material. I'm all for relevance. So I've curated a program, a new opera actually, for Lyric Opera of Chicago, based on the notion, what keeps me up at night? And it's urban violence in Chicago, it's loneliness and isolation, and climate. Wow. So we've created 3 pieces. We have 3 creative teams, I should say. Anna DeVere Smith's first opera libretto. And I wept through the whole thing. I am her biggest fan. She's a friend, and I love her. Oh my gosh, the whole Notes from the Field, insane. So then we have Caroline Shaw doing her first opera, composing her first opera on the loneliness and isolation piece, and John Luther Adams, who's been such a hit doing the climate.
Climate, yeah.
Yeah, so, and this will all, Sharon is directing this, and this will all kind of mash together and also be able to be used separately,
That's
each
great.
piece.
That's great.
So I think relevance draws people.
Yep.
I'm doing the hours at the Met this fall, which has been the most exciting project to begin to
fantastic.
work on. I've always wanted to play Meryl Streep. And so, and it's beautiful, it's moving. We're talking about, it's the first opera at the Metropolitan Opera in its history that has anyone who is, who is gay, we have the whole spectrum of, a much greater spectrum. We have suicide, we have so many issues that are relevant right now.
Right.
So I think people will see themselves in it and they'll have a good cry because the music is exquisitely beautiful. So relevance is one thing. Secondly, there was a study that said audiences might not want to sit in rows anymore. They come to arts events to be social with their friends and family. And they're asking that we kind of change the seating to pods so they can sit together, so they can be almost a kind of a, it's going back to what it was in the Baroque period when people ate dinner and talked through the whole performance and threw food and drink at the performance if they didn't like it. But we should probably be talking about this.
Absolutely. The, one of the things that has been very noticeable for me is that, for me, some of the lines that we've previously drawn between professional and amateur, for example,
Oh, that's interesting.
start to dissolve in a way. And the way we sort of formulated a couple of years ago was that artistry is actually something, it's not a binary, it's not you are or aren't an artist, but artistry is something that every human being has the talent for, has the need for, has something to express. Just some of us get to practice it a lot more than others. So we're on a grade, not in separate camps. And I've just gotten very excited about, spent my whole life in the professional nonprofit theater.
Right.
I just get very excited about, what if we just get more relaxed about using theater in professional and amateur and mixed professional and amateur, but actually just saying it's the art form and how it affects people's lives that really matter, not whether we draw a line about the professional.
I think
Especially
that's really
now.
important. I think that's great.
Are you thinking also to perhaps allow the audience to participate?
Absolutely.
I love that.
I think that's good, but I also think that this idea of professional, and inaccessible, it needs to go. Every human being is creative. When you say, oh, you're one of those creative types, I say, no, you are. Because I don't know, some of the greatest performances I've participated in, I think I've been one of maybe 4 professionals out of 500 people. A performance of Bernstein Mass, for example, you can add everybody to something like that. And also the thing I notice is that it also breaks a taboo that bothers me very much in art about perfection, that we're striving for perfection.
Right.
And I think perfection is way overrated.
Well, perfection implies commodification,
Yeah.
that you're trying to turn something into a perfect thing. Whereas actually for the performing arts, well, at least what we keep trying to do is dissolve the thingness of it, dissolve the
So it's an
commodity of it,
experience.
and exactly return it to what it really is, which is communication between
Yeah.
people. It's between the people on stage,
Yeah.
between the people on stage and the audience. That is what actually
I
makes
started
it
a
theater.
program with the Baltimore Symphony called Rusty Musicians. The musicians said, oh, that's a terrible idea. They never like my ideas. But I said, well, let's see. Let's put it out. If nobody wants to do it, then okay. So within 24 hours, we had 400 people sign up. And it was so interesting for me because then the musicians said to me, well, how will we select who participates? And I said, oh, nah, that's not how it's going to work. It's not about how good you are. It's about how much you want to do it. And if you signed up, you want to do it. So we tried this, and at first it was super weird. And
Did they play with the orchestra?
Yeah, and I said, but they have to be close enough to you. I'm not having 400 people come in and just sit with, we're going to do it in groups of 80 so that they can connect with you. And I said, and the most important thing is that you can let go of judging it. You don't have to rank it. You know, as artists, we're always, oh, that was a good performance. Oh no, I was bad. And you know, I said, you don't have to. You just have to enjoy yourself. And they looked at me like I was crazy.
It's not. I heard from so many people that they were told at some point, just move your lips. You know, to singing in a choir. Yes, okay. So you didn't say, take your bow off the front.
No. I mean, you wish you
let them.
To some of them, but you know, the great outcome at the end of the day is that the program still exists, and we morphed it into a fantasy camp in the summer, and 150 people come and pay a lot of money to sit and do this, and also the greatest byproduct ended up being that the person sitting next to you, who's a doctor or a clerk at a store, says, I wish I could be you. You are my hero. So the musicians start to hear those words that they need, that they don't get every day. So
it's beautiful.
And the musicians run the program now themselves.
That's fantastic.
Fabulous.
But that tells you that you can, I believe, I mean, you know, not necessarily for every experience, but I think the idea of opening up the creative opportunity to more people is really special. The end result is much more than the sum of the parts.
We started a program about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, called Public Works that the remarkable director, Lear de Bessonet, began at the Public. Her aunt is here, so I want to give a shout out. But it was community-based performances. We'd go to community-based organizations, create a relationship, and then at the end of the year, we would perform this enormous Shakespeare pageant with 5 great professional actors, 5 great professional musicians, and 200 community members, most of whom had never been on stage before. And one of the key things to it was that, and this was Lear's brilliant insight, is we went to places like the Fortune Society that deals with people with justice issues, or Dream Yard in the Bronx and Arch. And what we'd say is, we're the Public Theater, what do you need from us? And not here with what we have to offer. And the Brownsville Senior Center in Brooklyn, which at the time was the poorest zip code in the city, what they wanted was a jazzercise class. So by gosh, we did a jazzercise class for the senior citizens at the Brownsville Senior Center. And then we also brought them to the theater to see what we're doing. They started going, well, maybe we'd like to do some of that. And we ended up in our first Public Works show with a dancing chorus of 14 women over 80, so as old as 94, and then 3 years later, they were doing their all-female August Wilson. I mean, but the door only opened because Lear had that insight, is you don't start with what you're offering, you start with what people need, and what people want.
That's what I was saying.
Anything's possible.
That's what I was hoping for during COVID, that we would find more what people need.
We're finding places are now taking over empty malls and empty shops on Main Street and taking them over as sort of community centers, but with a heavy emphasis on arts. And I saw that 2 weeks ago in LA's Week of Arts and Health. So, for instance, there's a place called Linear that's in Pasadena that now has a huge theater piece, and also they have to keep expanding the classes that they offer for Parkinson's, because it takes a while for the word to get around, it takes a while for people to have the courage to come and participate. But the one I loved that I visited myself is called AbleWorks, and it's children who have some sort of, they're neurodiverse, I think is how you would say, but they're just extraordinary artworks that they create, they sell them, but most importantly, they have community with each other. And in fact, when COVID hit, one woman said her other kids were just lost, absolutely lost. But her daughter, who's on the spectrum, who has a spectrum disorder, was phenomenal. She had so many friends. She was completely happy.
Yeah. It's just extraordinary. You know, all of these experiences are indispensable for people, and I just think the idea that we, as leaders of institutions, professional artists, that we're throwing those doors open is just so important. That we're trying to say, you know, what do you need? We can help you with what you need, and if you like what we do, come on board and do it. And it's,
we sort of used to be an organization that said, you're all very fortunate to come into our doors.
Right.
that's right.
And aren't you lucky to be able to sit there and see what we can provide for you? And now that's all turning, and we are really becoming service providers, which is, I think, appropriate for these times.
It's thrilling. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I would love to, that we have a couple of folks with microphone. If people with microphone can go to people who are raising their hands, that'll work beautifully.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, my name is Simone. I am a performing arts student. I love the arts. And I'm curious to know, you mentioned it for a little that diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important. And I'd love to know some examples that like you all have used your privilege to be able to give someone else an opportunity to kind of be in the shoes of you guys.
If I could just say something really quick about that.
Sure.
My staff was very eager to school me in the months after George Floyd was murdered. And I made some real changes in my artistic practice, partly because I recognized that the criticisms were correct. I had become too privatized. I had not thought of myself that way. I thought of myself as vastly experienced and therefore able to make quick decisions. But we formed an artistic leadership group, which has been 3 men and 3 women, 3 BIPOC folks and 3 white folks from the beginning, although has rotated, and made the commitment that every major artistic decision would be discussed fully in that group, and that the decision would be made in the room. And the results have been just spectacular. Suddenly, I make much better decisions. It's very weird. And suddenly, my job doesn't look like it's my pinnacle that only Oskar can fill, because all of these other people in the room go, okay, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. And and that has been a liberation for me. And one of the other things it's done is that the wonderful time that I spent with my wife during the complete quarantine has lifted my fear of retirement. And so what it feels like, I'm serious. And
Yeah,
so
it was a good test run, huh?
Yeah, it was. And what I feel like is that's allowed me to shift, saying, oh, this next phase of my career is about how do I pass it on? And how do I pass it on in the most healthy, fiscally stable, value-centered ways to a group of people who are going to make a future that I can't quite imagine?
Well, Orchid speaks volumes for that, but in 2010, I had the privilege of singing with Lawrence Brownlee, who's a phenomenal tenor, unbelievably gifted, and he told me that he had been, in 2010, not gotten roles because he was black. And I said, now? Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe it, and I have been on a rampage ever since, because I just believe so much in the extraordinary talent. Now we've seen Terrence Blanchard have this incredible success with Fire Shut Up in My Bones. Amazing, yeah. And I saw The Champion before that and already loved him. But what I do is I nurture young singers. So at Washington National Opera, here in the summer, we have such a beautiful, gifted group this year. And really anywhere I work, I am looking for talent, and I want to nurture and give them extra help, whatever they need. As you said, it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be passionate. And we can't deny, the one good thing about voice is you can discover that you're incredibly gifted when you're 18.
Yeah.
You don't have to be 6 practicing the hours that it takes for instrumentalists. And I'd like to see it happen more in administrations. I'd like to see it happen more quickly in the orchestras and organizations and choruses. But we have tenure, we have unions, we have a lot of structures in place that make this challenging. Yeah. But not for singers, not for singers.
I think it's I don't think I do nearly enough. That's what I would say in my response. That also, sometimes I feel really handcuffed by the cumbersome nature of the organizations I work with, and the resistances, that are so ingrained that it's hard to break through. But I think that it's such a joy to connect people that are gifted, whether they're have opportunities or haven't had opportunities. And I mean, a small example is I have a friend, a Belgian friend, who was a bus driver as her career, but her partner was a conductor, so that's how I met these people. Anyway, she retired as a bus driver and decided to become a luthier, making violins. because, you know, she had an aptitude. And so she said, well, I want to make my first violin for you. I said, no, I don't play anymore. Why don't you make your first violin for one of my orchids? So she made her first violin, and Nima, who's now the first orchid who's at UMBC, which is a very competitive school, is playing on her violin. And now she's making a viola for Jaden, who's my one homeschooled orchid. And he grew really tall, so he needs a bigger viola. So she's working. But, you know, I know that this sounds like, you know, one little blade of grass, because it takes about 2 years to make one instrument. Wow. I mean, this is another thing. But somehow to connect my friend that I met oddly in Belgium to my kid in West Baltimore, that's what feels to me. You know, you can make the connections and open the doors and see what happens. And really, then it's up to the talent to step through, and hard work. It's not just about talent. They got to work hard.
So, yes.
So, hi, I'm Elliot Cosgrove. Thank you. I'm wondering if you could, any one of you or all three of you, talk about principles moving into the next chapter of this COVID world, right? We were all live, right? You had to be in your seat to appreciate the art form, the experience. Then we were all virtual, and it was all, and now we're entering into a new chapter of hybrid, right? This very session, we're here physically, and there are people watching remotely. And on the one hand, we want tushes in the mat. We want people to hear the performance. On the other hand, you're accessing an audience by live stream or otherwise that would otherwise never have that access. So how are you thinking about your art forms and the future of your crafts in this hybrid world?
Well, I was really shocked when I did the webinar during the beginning of COVID, 18 or 19 programs that were viewed. We had 700,000 views from 70 countries, which amazed me, although we all had a captive audience at that time. And I wonder, how has it been with digital performances for you both?
For us, we had a couple of remarkably successful performances right at the beginning of the pandemic. Richard Nelson wrote a beautiful, beautiful play. We commissioned a docudrama about frontline workers from Jessica Blank and Eric Jensen. And again, it was intoxicating. You know, getting fan letters from Kazakhstan was a new experience for me. That was fantastic. But I have to say, as soon as we could come back live, I'm really interested in continuing that work, but boy, I want to get live back again. Again, we're going to keep exploring there, but it just became so clear to me that the liveness of the communion is at the essence of why I do this anyway, and just everything pales beside it.
I mean, are you all comfortable? I'm comfortable in an audience wearing a mask. That really gives me a huge sense of security. Maybe that's not correct, but I love being in live performance.
I don't mind being the only one on the plane with the mask. I'm good. But I'd like to respond in a couple different ways. That I think this online attendance has really sort of opened the world broader. I know that I was conducting last week the finals of the Van Cliburn Piano Concerto competition. And the winner, an 18-year-old from South Korea, unbelievable. And he's had like millions of views of his performance. And I don't think that would have happened before people got into this. And I never thought I would see unionized orchestras agree to do online work. I didn't think that would ever happen in my lifetime. But now I wish they could take it and embed it and incorporate it to enhance the experience, so that if you're, I don't know, if you would be curious about what it's like to sit in an orchestra, I'd love to put a camera, you know, in the second violins, for example. You could sit there, you know, just on a break at work, in 10 minutes, and see what it's like. Or, you know, we'd send you, hey, tune in, this is when or I want to tell you about this Beethoven piece I'm working on. Come to my studio and study with me for a minute. I want to show you. See, I think we could open up the creative experience for people in a much broader way if we tried to marry it and embed it and use it, not just substitute.
So you're saying keep it and.
Yeah.
So.
And also change it so that it's more inclusive.
You know, but the extraordinary common thread, I think, that I'm hearing here is that coming back from this time, we're not only committed to the art, but it seems like there's an enormous amount of passion about expanding who gets to participate in the art and what the art gets used for. And that sense of democratic expansion is the thing that I hope we don't snap back from.
Yeah, me
I
too.
hope we preserve that energy.
I sang someplace this last season, and I looked out in the audience and I went, wow, there are all these families and kids.
That's
And
cool.
I went backstage and I said, how are you doing this? And they said, we just blanket said $20 tickets.
Right?
There you go, there's my,
And people come.
If anybody tells you that admission price isn't an enormous barrier, they're lying.
They're
'cause
wrong.
it is. We have to wrap this up, although I would.
oh,
It's Kafka.
she just wants to conduct again. I know what you want.
Okay, you all are amazing. Thank you. Whoa, sorry. I just wanted to know one quick question because I think it might be useful to the audience, and that is, the arts and community building. You talked about so many exciting programs, and I think a lot of people would be interested in volunteering or supporting these programs. And I wondered if there's any kind of place where you can find sort of these programs in your community, and if not, maybe someone could build it, because I would love to just go and share it with people or
That's a great
volunteer
idea.
there
Great idea.
or support like what you're doing.
I'm going to
in
add that to
Baltimore.
the app.
That's,
Yeah.
no, that's a great idea, though, to have a sort of a that's
clearinghouse.
One of the problems is that they're all dispersed
Scattered,
and
yeah.
scattered and individual. That's a great idea. I'll put it on my list.
Quick question though, is there a union barrier to volunteers?
In different situations, one has to work with the unions in different ways.
I don't think, but I don't, I mean, to some degree, but we can always use volunteers and we can always use support.
Especially for the kids and
the
for
kids.
some
Oh,
of
yeah,
the seniors that
absolutely.
Oskar was talking about.
Yeah.
It would be cool.
That's a great
Don
idea.
wanted me to ask you to sing, Renee, and I told him I wasn't going to do that. So
It would
Don't
be
worry.
It would be an octave lower than it should be. I'm hoping to get the voice back up by my performance on the 3rd in the tent. All come. It's George O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz, their letters to each other. It's a beautiful piece.
Is that the Kevin Putz?
Yeah, it's a Kevin
Oh,
Putz.
that's great.
Yeah.
And Friday, 5:30, while we're all plugging, please come.
Yes.
Thank you, audience.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Renee.
Oskar.
Thank you, Marin. Really.